Hey, it's Luminostic. I want to apologize for, I know it's been a week or so between my last videos, but life happens. We've had a lot going on. Um, also I want to thank a couple of new Patreon subscribers. I really appreciate that. Also I want to remind you to hit the like button and subscribe. Do it now, I'll wait. So, Awakening 101 is the title of this video, and I'm basically going to give an overview of the topics and disciplines that I'm going to get into in subsequent videos. Obviously we're in a very precarious position, the entire human race, in so many different ways, and it is my belief, and I'm sure it's a pretty commonly held belief, that higher consciousness, and at least clear consciousness, is the antidote, or at least a major first step. Because people, no matter what their path, no matter how they come to these states of consciousness, there are some consistencies and behavior changes in ways that support making the changes that we need to make in order to continue to survive as a human race and stop wasting so much human potential. So I guess we'll just dive right in. Something I've noticed lately that is probably the first step towards clearing out your consciousness, because it's really about, illumination is about just seeing what is actually there first and foremost. And with cognitive dissonance, you have a major impediment, and we all have it. It's when our belief systems come into conflict with reality in such a way that we're not able to evaluate things as they actually are. This has particularly come to my attention with people in the United States and their political positions. I've noticed people will make comments to the effect that voting is a complete sham, but yet they'll say in the next sentence, for example, that the problem is that people don't vote. This is a tremendous glaring example of cognitive dissonance. So one of the best exercises that I can think of for getting rid of cognitive dissonance is something that Aleister Crowley wrote about, and the practice is very simple, and it will definitely help to free you from any cognitive dissonance you might be suffering. So all you do is counteract every idea with its opposite. Everything contains its contradiction. This is one of the deep mystical truths of Hermeticism, and the practice of learning to see that also can be very valuable. Learn a tremendous amount. You'll notice the yin-yang symbol. There's the dark on one side and the light on the other side, but there's also a little bit of light in the dark side and a little bit of dark in the light side. So that practice is great for resolving cognitive dissonance, and this, obviously is a major first step. If you can't perceive what's there because you've been conditioned to believe whatever it is you've been conditioned to believe, I think that Terence McKenna's description of the brain as a human biocomputer, it's very important to understand the extent to which that's true. Whatever the mind has received as programming, especially if it's something that's been conditioned culturally over and over and over for you to believe, it's hard for the ego to accept that we are not really as free thinking as we'd like to believe we are. So that practice is very good. And again, I'm just going to go through a brief overview of all of the different disciplines and techniques in this video. So we'll get into resolving cognitive dissonance in greater detail in a later video, but I'm going to move on to also plant medicine and other entheogens. Reprogramming the mind. The power of psychedelics to reprogram the mind has been clinically proven over and over again. Probably the first times when the CIA started using it, I believe back in the late 50s and early 60s in the MK Ultra program, they were actually using LSD to completely make a blank slate of people's minds against their will and reprogramming a new identity. So I've made videos before about how you can use this to change habits, but you can also restructure your entire belief system. And it's actually pretty simple to do. It doesn't require high doses. And clinically, I think it was Princeton that did this test where they did brain scans on people while they were on psychedelics. I'll put a link to that study in the comments below. What they discovered was that new neural pathways are forming at 100 times normal rate. So we're talking about a tremendous amount of increased brain activity. there's also brain activity, electrical activity in parts of the brain that we don't normally use. So you literally have more brain capacity. It's as if you've upgraded your computer. And it's important too, if you have old ideas about how, psychedelics are just drugs and that they induce delusions and that, you're just high and you think you have all these wonderful ideas. If you live in the United States, I know that we have been programmed a lot to believe that. Even if you believe otherwise, you may find yourself full of doubt. So I would highly encourage you to look at all the studies. The red tape has been lifted in a lot of areas in the United States and in Europe, and there are a lot of really compelling studies being done, particularly with LSD and psilocybin. But I would imagine that, less studied compounds like DMT, ayahuasca, San Pedro or peyote, all have this capacity. So one great practice with psilocybin or LSD, I'm sure San Pedro as well, is to sit and think about the habit or the idea that you're trying to recondition and simply breathe in really deep, inundate the brain with oxygen. This allows it to do its job better, and it's, we've got all this extra activity going on. So just focusing on what it is that you're trying to program or deprogram, take deep breaths, hold the oxygen in, and then expel it. And a lot of people say that when you expel the air, it's important to think about what you're letting go of. I think that's probably valid. So plant medicines and entheogens are another tremendously effective way to push yourself forward on this path. I talk a lot about Hermeticism, Masonic magic, and the Western mystery tradition in general. There are a lot of practices that can be of great value that can be found in Israel Regardie's books, Aleister Crowley, Dogma and Ritual, which is an old Masonic book that you weren't supposed to have if you weren't a Freemason, that has leaked enough that you can get copies of it on Amazon now. There are all sorts of ideas and practices in those books that can help you to accelerate your journey. A big one that is promoted in that tradition, two of them actually, yoga. And we're not talking about the modern, sort of like a pop culture version of yoga. In the original yogic practices, the main focus was to achieve perfect stillness. Aleister Crowley went so far as to theorize that the body, actually, if you maintain this degree of stillness, he used to put a plate full of water on a student's head and have them sit for an hour, and if they spilled a single drop, they'd pass the test. So you are creating a degree of stillness for such a long time, the brain believes it's gone into rigor mortis. Of course, Aleister Crowley didn't know this at the time, but now we know that DMT is released at the time of death. So my belief is that if you maintain this position of stillness, which has, benefits other than releasing DMT, another great quote from Crowley along those lines is that the most complete set of talents and virtues is wholly useless in the absence of willpower and discipline. So, of course, these yogic practices are tremendously useful for developing the willpower and discipline to actually put the things you learn in the psychedelic state and through meditation into practice. So these stillness practices from yoga can be very beneficial. Pranayama, also I talked about with the psychedelics, inundating the brain with oxygen in order to empower it to do its work. In pranayama, you breathe in, hold the breath, release, hold the breath, and it's important that you release the breath completely. You want to push everything out. You don't want to retain any old air. And you start doing this, a lot of magicians in like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and other, probably the OTO, Hermetic societies, they begin with the fourfold breath, which means that it's just a 4 count. It's very easy. If you push pranayama up into higher counts of like 10, 15, 20, which is the goal, ultimately you want to slowly increase the count, but if you push it too fast, you can't hurt yourself. So you want to make sure that you're not extending yourself beyond your capacities, but pranayama is an extremely potent tool for reconditioning and deconditioning the mind. So there are those, and then from the Buddhists we have the practice of mindfulness. Self-awareness is a tool that we all generally, in my experience, tend to overestimate our capacity for self-awareness. So the practice of mindfulness is just observing and analyzing your thoughts. The thing about this is that it really becomes useful when it's constant. You have to think about everything you do and why you did it. You're constantly monitoring your thoughts, monitoring. Eventually, after years and years, if you're really persistent, you will find that you have developed sort of a higher self that is constantly monitoring your thoughts, analyzing, and it becomes an automatic process. And I believe that this is a big part of what achieving illumination and putting it into practice. Mindfulness is a huge constituent of all this. So these practices obviously combined, pranayama during a plant medicine ceremony with focused intent, very powerful way to go about restructuring. And I guess in closing, I would say that study of different forms of psychotherapy and psychology, for me, looking for correlations between ancient and mystical practices and things that are being discovered in modern physics, because we want certainty, not faith. You want to correlate what you're learning spiritually with other external systems. When the mystics say that all is one, this is not just some like trite cliche that all gurus and mystics say. It's quite literally true. So observations in one system that correlate with another system give you faith that what you're learning is actually not some subjective metaphysical thought that you've had, but actually a truth that exists independently of your subjective experience in the universe. So I hope that's of help. Later on this week, we're going to probably get into my first music lesson, and it's not going to be necessarily just for guitarists. We're going to talk a little bit how an awareness of energy and an openness to certain concepts like the collective mind can really empower a musician. So if you're not a musician, I would strongly recommend watching that video. And then we're going to get more in depth into Hermeticism and the practices associated with the Western occult mystery tradition. So hit the like button, subscribe, and we'll see you in a few days.